asking, what is women's practice, right? And so the question, the answer to what is women's practice is practices specific to a woman's body, right? That's one way that you could describe women's practice. Some people describe women's practice and conflate it with feminine practices, which isn't quite the same. And the reason it's not quite the same is that there's things that are specific to having a woman's body, literally having the plumbing of a woman and the energetic makeup of a woman. And then there's things that are specific to expressing the feminine aspects in one's body. And that could be done by men and women alike. So men could be doing feminine practices. Women can do feminine practices. But only women can do women's practices specific to the woman's body. And I know that's sometimes considered a bit controversial because we're all the same, but we're not. And it doesn't matter how much people tell me we're all the same. Anybody who's ever had hormones run through their body knows we're not having the same bodies as a man. That's just the way it goes. Also, we're built for different things. And based on the fact that we're built for different things, our bodies react different than a man's body reacts. So when we talk about women's practice, we're talking about practices that are specific to the energetics in a woman's body. We talk about feminine practices, we're talking to practices specific to expressing the feminine aspect in our bodies, men and women alike. Of course, the key in women's practice is embodiment for a number of reasons, because we're accessing the wisdom of the body. Or another way of saying it is we're accessing the natural genius of a woman's body, which is built for very specific things, amongst them pleasure, birth, feeling, ongoing power and stamina. So those are all aspects of a woman's body that you can access and train to widen the capacity in. And then the last bit of women's practice, when we look at what is women's practice, is the accessing of the archetypal wisdom that comes through the long line of women from the beginning of time, which is programmed in all of us, not only epigenetically, but just through the kind of collective unconscious, where all the wisdom of all the women who've gone before us is somewhere available. And when you can tap into that, you don't have to constantly reinvent the wheel. No? And some women sometimes describe this in birth, of course, it's very apparent, where the collective information that's stored in the body presents itself, hopefully, if you're not too disconnected, in order to make the birth experience happen, where you then just know what needs to be done, even though you don't know, but it's right there. So then the question is, why do we do women's practice? Number one, of course, reconnecting to the body as the instrument of our experience, and the instrument of pleasure, and the instrument of perception. Another one is to access wisdom and the full range within ourselves. So back to accessing our own experience, our own wisdom, as it's been collected through the years, and expressing the full range of what's available within us. And also to create fluidity between the masculine and feminine aspects within ourselves. And that's particularly important these days because we spend a lot more time cultivating the masculine aspects, meaning the aspects of doing, directing, focusing, discipline. You were saying you're in a field where, well, you are as well, right, where it's incredibly important that you stay focused and meticulous and specific and, you can follow a thread. That requires a certain kind of disposition in the body, and then being wildly fluid and alive and pleasurable requires a completely different set of circumstances. So nowadays we have to do women's practice because we are not spending most of our day in that flow. We spend most of our day in the go. And then another reason, I said that earlier with what is women's practice, but why do we do women's practice? So we become incredibly versatile in our expression and responsive. So we know what we're feeling and we can express it. Many of you have heard me talk about this before because it's also part of the teacher training. There is energetics in a woman's body that make it such that the kind of work that we're doing these days is physically unhealthy for us. Right? So before we talk about relationship and sex and creative expression, the very act of sitting all day, doing focused work that requires all of our expansive energy to collect and tighten and move up and out is extremely unhealthy for the body. That tightness in the lower body, the tension in the genitals, the belly, the chest, the solar plexus, all the way up to here, and the neck and the shoulders and the jaw, that kind of chronic tension causes massive health issues. And that's pretty apparent nowadays when you look at the kind of massive rise in women's health issues. Everything from, cancers, high blood pressure. I mean, that pretty much everything has increased as women had to work against the natural flow of their bodies. And now, that's not an excuse to not do those things. It just means that it necessitates other practices. And many of those practices are the practices we're doing. So the tight, tense, upward motion can be counteracted by the things we're doing here. And some of you have reported that this morning, where the unstructured movement and the unstructured engagement with the body produces the reverse flow, where you start feeling again, where you start becoming alive sensually, sexually, and you also have greater access to yourself and what you're about. The most common barriers to being embodied are, the obvious: extreme stress, lots of masculine work, tightness, disconnection, stress, overwhelm, and trauma. And if you've had any trauma in your past, and I'm categorizing everything from surgery to accidents to physical or verbal bodily abuse, so that it's a whole range. All of those things tighten and tense and disconnect the body. So women's practices are geared towards undoing those things. And then the main features of women's practices, as you all very well know, is relaxation, right? All the practices around relaxation, all the practices around sensitization, as you did, for instance, this morning with Steve, and training for responsiveness, which is the ability to feel something in the body and without a delay or a filter deal with it, either by acting it out, by dealing with it, by processing it. And that same responsiveness, of course, comes in handy sexually, because you become attuned to what's happening and you don't have a delay in the response. So the main benefits of women's practice is, of course, first and foremost, that always has to be the main benefit: health. Right? So the more you're in your body, the more you are sensitive to the signals of your body, the more your body is relaxed and open, the more you are, on one hand, able to feel the things that are happening in your body, and on the other hand, the better your body will function. The exact same things I just said, of course, apply to pleasure. The more relaxed you are, the more you can feel. And the more sensitized you are, the more the sensations can transmit through your whole body. And then, of course, there's intuition, very important. Right? So sensitization and relaxation aid intuition, aid proper feeling, and knowing what you're feeling. Relationship, same there. Steve always talks about feeling being the ground of intimacy. So until you can feel, you can't feel yourself or another. And Then the final one, I mean, there's many others, but the final one is devotion. So your ability to feel beyond yourself and another into the devotional realm, or however you want to call it, love, spirit, universal realm, which also requires an opening in the relaxation and the responsiveness.